Okay. Is that it?
Katie?
Okay. The plant of the month this month is from the mustard family. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The plant of the month, it's in the mustard family, which is Brassicaceae, which we don't really usually hear much about, and except for the very invasive, very problematic yellow bastard cabbage that is growing around Texas and other places. And one of the reasons why we don't hear much about the mustard family is because many of the plants are small. They have kind of small flowers. They bloom early in spring and then they disappear. So they're not around for a long time. So in order to bring a little attention to this family, I chose to do this plant, Purple Rocket, as a plant of the month. And the scientific name is Iodanthus Penitifidus, which I had to practice saying that several times. It's not a plant that you can go out and buy locally. I looked around the United States and came across a nursery in Kansas, or excuse me, in Kentucky. They were out of stock. But so this is the kind of plant that I think you just have to relax, not worry about it, and enjoy it if you see it, if you're lucky enough to see it. And also, I don't know that it would do very well in our gardens because it likes a really high quality natural area, pretty foresty, and it also likes to be in areas where it might flood on occasion. And that's exactly where it is in the Brazos Bend State Park. It's within, I would say, a couple 100 feet of the Brazos River, which does occasionally flood. And so it has that aspect of its preferred conditions fulfilled. Let's see, what else? I mean, that's kind of about it. It really is one of those plants that if you're walking along, you look at it and you go, oh, what is that? Because it's big and it's lavender and it's just really attractive. So if you have a chance to go out to Brazos Bend State Park and walk the Buckeye Trail, it is on the long loop is where I saw it. I'm going next week because it still hadn't started blooming. So I just recommend it. And it's such a beautiful walk. So I hope you can enjoy it. And I'll say once again that in the thanks and credits, there are a couple of websites that I really think, the people who do them do a great job. One is the Illinois Wildflowers, and that guy writes quite a bit of information about all the plants. So if you wanted to just read a little more, and he often tries to include the fauna and how the insects use it and any mammals that are walking by. And then also the Alabama website, that guy doesn't have as much information, but he takes great pictures. So I think that's pretty much it for now. This slideshow is on the website, so you can look it up. And I just wanted to say that tonight I'm wearing turtle earrings in honor and thanks to the incredible rescue job that those incredible people did when they saved all those turtles during the freeze. So,
yeah. Okay. Tonight's presentation is by Tiana Rehman, and she is the collections manager of the Philecology Herbarium at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, or BRIT, at Fort Worth, Texas. And her topic tonight is Aggregating Our Collections, a team effort to share information about Texas flora. Tiana facilitates the care, usage, and growth of the scientific plant collection at BRIT Herbarium. And that herbarium houses approximately 1.5 million specimens, making it the 10th largest herbarium in the US. She received a BS in environmental science and a BA in cultural anthropology from Southern Methodist University. And her MS in environmental science is from Texas Christian University. Tiana continues to be an active field botanist and has contributed specimens to the herbarium from floristic projects in Texas, Peru, Costa Rica, and Jamaica. Her current projects includes the curation and digitalization of herbarium specimens for 4 National Science Foundation grants covering geographic areas of Texas, Oklahoma, Philippines, and taxonomical specialty. Her taxonomical specialties includes ferns, orchids, carnivorous plants, etc. So let me turn over the screen to Tiana.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to stop. Good. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. Hold on half a second. I didn't start my presentation. Here we go. All right. Let me share the correct screen. All right. Hopefully you're all looking at a bright orange screen. Do I see some nods? Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it very much to have all of you here, and give me just another second. I'm actually expanding the window so that I can see all your faces and making sure I turn on the chat. It is 7 o'clock at night, and I'm sure all of you have had long days. So please don't hesitate to ask a question in the chat. Unfortunately, we can't be in person, but my way of doing that is by paying attention to the chat as best I can. So please go ahead and ask the questions as I go along. I'll do my best to answer them. And if I miss them, then ask them again, please, at the end. So thank you for having me, and thank you for that nice introduction. And I hope you enjoy this presentation. There's certainly lots of images. And what I'll be talking about today is one of those National Science Foundation's grants that Len was talking about, one that's actually very important to our area, which I'm sure you may have heard of perhaps in one way or another, but hopefully this kind of gives you an overview of it, who's participating and what's happening and what ways you can use those data. And thank you, I think it was Katie, for putting up the Iodanthus. I'm actually going to do some PowerPoint slides, but I'm also going to show you some live demonstrations online of how you can access the data. And now I've got my target species. So thank you. We'll have a look at that one when we get there. All right. There's a lot of words on this screen, so if it's too much for you, please just concentrate on that photograph, which is a picture from 2016 from an annual meeting of the Texas-Oklahoma Regional Consortium of Herbaria, which is an organization that is trying to advocate and group our herbaria in Texas and Oklahoma. The project I'll present to you today is actually led by 5 institutions. You can see them there at the top: BRIT, Oklahoma State University, University of Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and the University of Texas at Austin. And these 5 institutions put together a collaborative grant to the National Science Foundation. In late 2018, we were notified that we were awarded in 2019. So you'll hear me call it the TCN, which stands for Thematic Coordination Network. And the point of this grant that was written was to digitize and mobilize the data from about 2 million vascular plant specimens that are deposited in herbaria that are collected in Texas and Oklahoma, to disseminate those data through a platform. So that's the platform I'm going to show you today, so you can access these data, to develop and implement strategies to increase the efficiency of how we're digitizing these, and to recruit and engage community scientists and students on these in project-based activities, perhaps. So you'll hear a few examples of these. There's a lot that's changed in how we were planned on approaching the project because of COVID. Many herbaria don't have access to their collections, have difficulty recruiting students to work on the collections and retaining some of those students. So things are changing, and every institution is a little bit different. But what am I talking about? I know that you are the choir, and I know that you probably know quite a lot about herbaria and other natural history collections in the area, but I thought it would be helpful to go over this. You're actually looking at photographs from the BRIT Herbarium. But what is a herbarium? It's a collection of preserved botanical specimens that's arranged systematically for research and education. It is permanent and accessible. Now, when I say systematically arranged, different herbaria will arrange their collections differently. Our collection is organized by major plant group, then alphabetically by family. So over here, oh, I realized my reverse the image. So you're not going to be able to read any of those labels, even if it was large enough on those folders there. You're looking down the central hallway, inside a cabinet, and then a close-up of the folders within a cabinet. Different colors denoting different regions of the world where those plants are collected. We are one of many institutions. This is from the New York Botanical Garden. They host something called Index Herbarium, which perhaps you've all heard of. It's a global registry for herbaria. So all these little red dots, and this was pulled from their website in January, represent herbaria. They represent over 3,000, almost 3,500 active herbaria, and the professionals that are safeguarding somewhere around 396 million specimens, documenting plant occurrence in the world. If you're coming over here to the Texas and Oklahoma area, this map is actually from a separate presentation that we provided to the Texas Master Naturalists. So the colors that you see on the state of Texas represent the different Master Naturalist chapters. This was created by Ashley Bordelon, who works with me in the BRIT Herbarium. And all the stars represent different herbaria. It is not exhaustive. There may be smaller herbaria that aren't represented on here, but these are the herbaria that are participating in this digitization project. So this is what the inside of the herbarium looks like, well, and outside, I suppose, here. So these are pictures from the BRIT Herbarium. If you've been to our facility in Fort Worth, we are now a combined organization with the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, as you can see by our new logo down at the bottom. But BRIT retains, the BRIT Herbarium, the Philecology Herbarium, retains that sort of BRIT Herbarium code, an acronym. You can see that building. It's a bit hard to see, it's small, but up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that the building, the BRIT building, is in an L shape. The greenish portion is our living roof. And then pointing towards the bottom left hand corner of that circle is the herbarium. And you can see a solar array on top of that. Although with our living roof, everything was built, so there would be no leaks, of course. We didn't want to risk that above our priceless dried herbarium specimens. So these are all pictures of people that work or have worked with the herbarium. But what does that herbarium hold? So this is what I'm really talking about. These are those almost 2 million specimens that we're talking about digitizing and mobilizing. So specimens are dried flat. Field observations are used to generate labels which accompany the specimens. So you're looking at a snapshot from INAT, which I do very much hope, Land, that y'all get somebody to come talk about INAT. It is an incredible tool. Researchers are using it all the time, as well as those of us just wanting to learn more about these plants. This is one of the places I go when I'm visiting an area and I want to know, well, what am I going to find flowering in that area? I'm able to go in there and find out, well, what's been seen in the months of March in Arkansas around Hot Springs, where I went last week. So that was pretty fun. In the middle is, I thought I'd throw this one in here, a cameo, as I'm sure quite a lot of you recognize Dr. Barney Lipscomb. He doesn't have a doctorate, but Barney Lipscomb, who's the head of BRIT Press and the Lenhart Chair of Texas Botany, also one of the co-authors of the North Central Texas Flora and East Texas Flora. He is there pretending to be Charles Wright at a collaboration with the Amon Carter on one of their exhibits last year. And then ultimately, you know, the star of the show is the herbarium specimen that you see here on the right. And you'll see a lot of these in this presentation, but I pulled out that label because I thought you might like to see this was the product of one of our digitization grants to digitize ferns. And if you have a look at that, you can see it's an 1875 collection and the collector is John Muir. So this is one of 3 collections of John Muir's we have in our herbarium, and one of countless treasures, some of which we've yet to discover. So pretty cool specimen. So what does a herbarium specimen consist of? A source of primary data, it's evidence about the existence of a plant in space and time. You've got the living collection, you can see here on the left, you've got the label data culminating in a dried, pressed, preserved, affixed to cardstock specimen that is stored in those cabinets and in those folders that I showed you earlier. There's many parts of the specimen that are important, but really that primary label, which is typically there on the bottom right hand, that gives you all the details about the collection event. That's what makes it a scientific collection and not something that you could buy off of Pottery Barn or Crate and Barrel to put up on your wall. And I'm going to answer this even though perhaps none of you have asked it yet, but people always ask about that little fragment pack. If you didn't have a chance to read all the text, often when you dry that plant material, pieces will fall off. So this allows you a little envelope that's glued to the sheet of paper where you can put that material, which researchers down the line can use to look at dissected flowers, or if there's ample material, potentially take some of that for genetic studies, for DNA studies. But what's the tie back to Texas? Why did NSF decide to give us this grant? Well, these are all the compelling reasons that I don't really have to explain to you, but there's some of the arguments that we laid out in the proposal. And it was really talking about the high diversity of biotic and abiotic conditions here in Texas. The ecoregions, 17 level 3 ecoregions in our area. It's an American crossroads of ecological and biological diversity. We've got these extreme ecological gradients, and you can see some of those examples up on this screen. And we really are where the east meets west. And where you have some of those, that crossroad effect happening in there. So with that diversity of plants, we've also got threats that we're looking at. Yep. So variety of human factors, overgrazing, mining, exotic invasive organisms. I'm sure these are things that you've talked about before, but these herbaria are critical repositories. I showed you these 3 images earlier on. And you'll notice they're in light-tight, airtight cabinets, and they're in a locked and, a place that is only accessible by appointment, but it is accessible. As we are trying to make these specimens more relevant to studies, we have to find ways of mobilizing those data. We have to find ways of taking those handwritten text on those labels, that specimen, maybe the characters of the specimen, that it is flowering, that it has fruit, the size of the leaves, and putting those in a place that they can be accessed to answer questions, like some of these which were listed as potential questions that could be answered by this grant to digitize these data. So what are these patterns of species richness and phylogenetic diversity and these complex relationships with those gradients I showed you, those maps I showed you in the previous screen? And then here, what will those vegetation responses be to climate change? I was talking about the east meeting west, and I know a lot of you have spent probably some time online looking at plant distributions, and you interestingly see, well, some that have a southeastern distribution, some that remain the western distribution. And so having these specimens collected in Texas and Oklahoma at the very range of a species range becomes really important when you're looking at modeling these species and how their distribution may change under just changing and differing climatic regimes. So let's see. So these are the people that are currently participating. Let me see if it's listed in here. St. Edward's University is not listed in here. So that's a new herbarium. So these are all a list of all the herbaria in Texas and Oklahoma, and some from out of state, out of the 2-state region, that are part of this grant, that have committed to digitizing their Texas and Oklahoma collections. Like I said, like St. Edward's, there's a few institutions that have been added to this. There's quite a few institutions where we haven't even started the process of digitization because of COVID. And you'll see that they're in these little squares, and there's a bolded institution listed in each one of these shapes, and that is the institution that's sort of managing the efforts of the rest of the names in here. So there are 41 herbaria in Texas and Oklahoma, about 1.7 million specimens, and then there's 5 herbaria outside the region that hold some of our critically important historical specimens. The project manager is Diego Barroso, who's actually here at BRIT, employed here at BRIT, and the data manager is Clay Barrett, who is actually at Oklahoma State University. So this is what we mean by digitization. Essentially, it's 3 steps. It is photographing that specimen at high resolution. So you're looking at one of our typical, not the only setup we have, but one of our typical setups. It's a light box with a camera on a copy stand above it. So generating an image. The second is to generate a parsed transcription of those labels. So y'all saw some of those labels I was showing you earlier that are handwritten. So one, the difficulty being that they're handwritten. Two, a difficulty being to parse out the data into specific fields in a database so that the county name ends up in the county field, or habitat data ends up in a habitat field. So that's the second step of digitization, transcription. And then lastly is georeferencing all these localities. So to make this of most use to all these large studies, these big data studies I was talking about, we need to be able to pinpoint these on a map. So this is the last step, and typically it only happens at the very end once things are transcribed. So most of our institutions haven't even started this process yet. And then this is a portal where you can access the data. This is what I'll be showing you a little bit later, so you don't have to note it down right now. And on the right hand of the screen, you're seeing at the top what that web page looks like, and on the bottom right hand of the screen, you're seeing what data entry looks like for one of our digitizers. So who are our digitizers, our digitization agents? So they're the curators and the collections management staff at these herbaria, some funded, some not funded at these herbaria. We have an internship program through this grant. Now, this hasn't actually happened yet just because well, that's not true. In a few occasions, for a few people, a few institutions, this has happened. But stay posted, because when we're able to, we'll probably start moving with this internship program. I'm not yet sure how those internships will be advertised, but if you or someone you know is interested, don't hesitate to call me or send me an email. I provide my email address at the end. And then students and professionals at these institutions and volunteers and community scientists. This has been, and I'm speaking now for BRIT alone, this has been really huge for us. We've had some just wonderful outpouring of support from community scientists, from registered BRIT volunteers here locally to help us. Over the last year, we typically have something like 30 volunteers come in through the herbarium every week to help us, from mounting specimens to filing them to something else entirely. And we are fortunate some of those folks were willing to join us online. And I'll talk about how you can now join us if you'd like as well. That's one of we have to look for the silver linings. And one of the things that that COVID and the pandemic restrictions have forced on all of us is an increased familiarity with things like Zoom. And you know, it's a bit more inclusive in some ways, and exclusive, I suppose, as well. But I'll tell you a little bit more about those opportunities a little bit later. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to really gather some of the other people outside of just the BRIT institution that are part of this grant, digitizing. So I'm going to show you at least the folks that are working with me in the BRIT Herbarium. Now, not all these folks are working directly on the Torch grant, but they are indirectly working on it. But they're all involved in some way, shape, or in digitizing our holdings, in digitizing the orchids or the ferns, like Lan mentioned when she introduced me at the beginning, or the Texas plants there. All right, so this is what I was mentioning about community scientists and what they've been helping BRIT do in the last year. We call it the Armchair Botanist Program, and it is a program where we are collaborating with members of the general public, some whom we know, some whom we don't, to transcribe and parse data from images of herbarium specimens that we put online. This is primarily done through a platform called Notes from Nature, which I'll probably pop into and show all of you briefly. And we have weekly Zoom sessions, and these are the people that typically run these programs, all these folks in the bottom left-hand corner. Everyone here is at BRIT except Clay Barrett, who's at Oklahoma State. And this is what it looks like every week. We have transcriptions Wednesdays at noon. If you would like to join us, you are welcome to. You can find out more by going to brit.org/armchairbotanist, and I'll put that in the chat so you can see that there. And it is generally a casual Zoom conversation. We typically started off with an iNaturalist observation of something that's relevant or timely or flowering outside right now. We talk a little bit about that. One of the things we do is a little bit of plant ID and trying to identify the plant specimen before we look at its label. which is lots of fun, except those of you that are familiar with the grasses, I applaud you because we're in the grasses right now, and it's a little bit difficult to do some of these grass IDs from these macro images, but please consider joining us if you'd like, or share this. All right, so this is where I'm going to do the live demonstration. So this is where the data exists online. So now let me, and I am, all right, here we go. Let me open up a new page. All right, so I'm going to copy this link and paste it into the chat. So you have it there and you can save it to your computer if you wish. So this is the portal where we're putting all our information. Some of you may have come across this before. Some of you may have seen an entry window. Let's see. Sorry, I forgot the exact. Sign it. Let's see, here we go. Some of you may be more familiar with this interface. So both SciNet and then the Torch portal exist on the same server. So when I go here and I click on search and search collections, and what I'm going to do is make this a little bigger. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to see. So what I did is I clicked on search collections. And then when I scroll down here, I'm able to see all the different institutions. You can see I can minimize this. These are the different consortia. A lot of this is funded from the National Science Foundation. Some of these institutions are independently digitizing their material. This has all been part of a 10-year program that's just ended, sponsored by the National Science Foundation, called ADBC, Advancing the Digitization of Biological Collections. So these are some of the herbaria, some of the consortia, I should say. Here's our Torch collections. So you see you have the option to select everything, or you can just select certain institutions and search their material. I'm going to search everything. I'm going to hit on the search button. And then these are the fields that you can search by. So these are the data that community scientists or staff or digitization agents have pulled off these sheets so that these specimens are discoverable. So I'm going to look up Iodanthus Penitifidus. Here we go. Let's have a look in just Texas. And I think, Katie, in your presentation, actually, before I hit, I'm going to keep the suspense in here. I think in your presentation, you mentioned it existed in 8 counties. When I go to USDA plants, and I'm going to zoom in, I did this search earlier. It's only listed according to USDA plants in 4 counties. When I go to the Bonap, the synthesis program, you can see, you zoom in and you can see that it's, oh goodness, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 counties. I wasn't able to check on which ones they were. Most people have access to this. The Bonap one's a little bit harder to find, but it's accessible online. All right, let's pop back into here. So Iodanthus Penitifidus, I'm going to hit on list display. So this now gives me a list of the collections that return that result. So you can see it's found 14 records, and that's searching across all those different institutions that were that were listed in the collections list. You can see BRIT pops up at the top with 2 collections here, Grady Webster back in 1950. Let's have a look at that collection. I can click on full record details. Here's my specimen. You can see how large it was. That's what Katie was mentioning in her presentation. All right, so you'll notice when you look at this specimen here, you see it's in the Brassicaceae. You see it's been collected in 1950 on June 30th. You can see that there were additional collectors. But when I open up this image here, okay, maybe I should have opened up the medium image. It normally is not this slow. I'm not really sure what's happening. All right, oops. All right, let's do this one more time. All right, well, here's my medium image. Let's see if it's, so if I zoom into this medium image, you'll notice there's actually a lot more information on this label than you were able to see parsed out and available in the text. And I don't mean to, this is kind of the minutiae, but it's important, and I want to make sure all of you know this because you might be the end users of this project, and I want you to know that the way that people are digitizing their collection varies. And people may have an occurrence record, which is what this program calls them. It may have a specimen that's already online and it's discoverable, but it's only skeletally transcribed. That means only maybe key fields are transcribed. And our staff and our volunteers are going through the system and trying to flesh those records out. I tell you this because people often say, well, it's not in the portal, or I wasn't able to find it, or it wasn't georeferenced, or it's not listed for that county. And each of these specimens and their data, their surrogate on here, is sort of evolving. And you should know that the database changes from minute to minute as additional information is added for any one of these collections. All right. Oh, good. It did actually open. Oh, well, it's still opening up. We're gonna leave that aside. I think I made my point. All right. So now you'll notice, I think you'll recall, I actually asked to see it in list view. If I click on this button, I can now see those same collections in a sort of an Excel table type view. You can actually sort these, but you can, so let's sort these by count, not country. Can I sort by county? Yes. Sort. So you can see that this identifies them for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counties. So it makes me wonder, well, what's going on with these Harvard collections? There's no county listed, so have they completely digitized their material? Perhaps our 8th county is lurking in here. Or perhaps that 8th county is a literature record, a citation. So one of the things that this project will do is not only tell us what we know about Texas, what plant specimens we have across the state, or species and where they are. It'll also tell us what we don't know. And that example of the Iodanthus was a good one. I'm not familiar with the species, so I really don't know what these counties it was in are. But something like having that, which is probably from the Turner Atlas, that 8th county, knowing where the literature citation indicated it existed, it would be great to follow that up with a physical collection. So anyway, this is basically prioritizing our gaps as well, or identifying our gaps so that we can prioritize them. All right, let's go back in here. Let me go home. I see that Sue wrote in here that the picture of the plant should have a ruler for measurement. I'm glad you said that. Let's have a look at the Harvard one. Actually, I know that, so you'll notice I didn't really zoom into it, but the specimen itself does at least have an image or a scale bar typically as part of that sheet. So you can see that up here. Something else, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that about the picture, is most herbaria, I won't say all, but at least most herbaria that I'm aware of plan on imaging the specimen a single time. If it's imaged today, it can have hundreds of years from now on which work will be done on that specimen. Annotations or additional labels identifying the plant might be added to that sheet. So it's always something to pay attention to, that your image may not be of the most up-to-date version of that specimen. The data up here should be up to date, but the image itself might not. If you go back to one of the BRIT images, let's open that medium image, you'll notice down at the bottom here, it actually has an image stamp. So that gives you at least some idea of when that specimen image was captured. So you can maybe, this was down in 2016, so you might imagine what could have happened in the intervening years. All right. So some other cool things that this can do, you can generate a dynamic checklist. Let's pop into your Houston area. Let's just do in here. All right, let's select right the middle of Houston, and I'm going to build my checklist. That's interesting. All right, well, luckily I already ran. Oh, good, it did work. So now you've got here a list, and it tells you how many taxa are in that area. And that only includes, of course, anything that has data telling the database where that plant was collected, but you've got a list of 1,090 species. We expect there to be more in that area. You also have the ability to display this as images. Here we go. These are stock images that are typically supplied from a few other places. I don't think they're all from a single place, but it lets you do some of these things which are rather interesting. So I'm going to close that out. Did anyone have any other? Katie has a good question. Is Bonap a reliable source for county information? It seems so much more reliable than USDA. That's rather funny. We had a Torch Executive Committee meeting just yesterday, and we were discussing the differences between these two, because there was a point at which USDA plants, Bonap contributed data to USDA plants, but it's kind of moved away from that. They're separate. And Bonap is really great for some taxa, and then perhaps less reliable for some others. But John Cartez is actively working on Bonap, as there are people working on USDA plants. So I would say it probably depends on the plant you're looking at. And at least I've found I typically look at both these resources if I'm going to a new place and I'm trying to generate a species list of what I might see or what's been reported for the area. I typically look at both of them, because something we haven't really discussed also is synonyms and what names are accepted and used in those two, and they do vary. So that's something else to pay attention to. The other thing I should say is that you know, with 1.5 million specimens to be digitized from Texas alone, or about 1.4. Most herbaria don't have the time to curate each one of these specimens before digitizing it. So there are, I would say almost none. There's a few collections where they're able to do that, but most of them aren't. And so what that means is, as we find it in the cabinet, we're digitizing it. We're hoping that once these data are together and aggregated in a system like this, we're able to see where those outliers are. We're able to find specimens that are misidentified. And it's already been happening. I've already had, in the last week and a half, I've had 3 different comments sent to me about plants on BRIT specimens and their misidentification. So it's been really helpful. But I tell you that just to let you know that not each one of these specimens is verified for identity and data prior to be putting online. I'm just popping through the questions. Yeah, it looks like Richard Kelly looked for a Gulf Coast penstemon and downloaded the large image. So I'm surprised that it's taking a while. It normally doesn't take this long during the day, but I'm afraid I can't comment on that quite. The servers where these images are hosted are known to go down sometimes, so you may find problems. And unfortunately for the end user, for somebody looking at these, you're not necessarily going to know that that image is temporarily down. Okay, so I think I want to go back to the presentation, but we're at 7:45, so since I'm answering questions as we go, do y'all mind if I spend another couple minutes? If I'll go to about 7:50, and then I'll leave 10 minutes for questions. If you have any objections, then please let me know. Let's see. So this is the Notes from Nature platform. I was mentioning the Armchair Botanist program. So this is where we recruit. This is what our weekly Wednesday Transcription Wednesday events are about. If you pop in here, you'll see that this is all based on the Zooniverse platform, which has many other scientific, community scientist supported programs, but this is specifically for transcribing museum collections. You can see there's not just plants, there's bugs, a few different things that you can explore in here, but we're interested in plants. And when you come to plants, you'll see our torch project. BRIT is fortunate that we actually do have access to our building. We're separated and isolated in here, but we're able to keep generating images. So that means we're able to put these online and ask for help to transcribe them. Right now, we've got torch Texas specimens from the NLU collection at BRIT, the 3rd expedition. If you click in here, there's a whole video. If you go to that earlier website I shared, if you want to know more about what this is like, you can pop in and look at that video. But this is what we typically do. You look at the image of a specimen, zoom into the label, and then you follow along on the right-hand side, and it tells you what kind of data we're asking you to pull and retype out from that label. So that's Notes from Nature. It's pretty exciting. There's a way to chat here. There's a chat forum. You don't have to sign up. You can do it totally anonymously, or you can choose to create an account. All right. Well, I'm going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. Give me a second while I pull that up. All right. Are y'all looking at my PowerPoint again now, I hope? All right, sweet. Thank you, Mark. I'm looking at you for nods. You're up on my screen. So I asked, unfortunately, I didn't have time to get a lot of these back from the people I asked them, but I asked some of the folks participating on the project to send me some of their superstar specimens and some of the cool specimens that they had come across. And so with a little bit of short notice, these are some of the cool ones that I'd like to show you and highlight. So this is a specimen from the University of Oklahoma sent to me by Amy Butode and Abigail, oh goodness, I've forgotten Abby's last name, Moore? Goodness, please forgive me. She is the curator of the BEB Herbarium there at the University of Oklahoma. But this is one of their specimens. Well, I should say it's actually 2 specimens. So if you ever go collect specimens, please put 1 specimen per page. But this happens to be a specimen that's got 2 on there. So you'll notice there's 2 barcodes. There are 2 labels on this sheet. You may recognize it as Asclepius stenophylla. This is a species I think we have here in Texas as well. But the interesting thing about this one is the date of collection and where it was collected. So 1894, plants of Indian Territory. So this is one of those specimens that documents a really important point in time as well. Before the state of Oklahoma, when likely collected in this region that you can see in blue on this map that came from TulsaWorld.com, showing the boundaries of the 5 tribes of Native peoples that that managed this Oklahoma territory. Unfortunately, they weren't able to, I think it was federal regulations, was it in almost the turn of the century, that stopped recognizing these tribal governments, and they tried to generate their own state, but that also wasn't successful, and this became part of the state of Oklahoma in I think early 1900s, 1906 or something along those lines. But really interesting specimens that that document important moments in our history, and I don't know who else they were collecting with in this particular, and I actually haven't even looked to see who actually collected this specimen. Oh, collected by B.F. Bush, about whom I don't know very much. And I don't know who else might have been on that collecting team, but it does all these specimens bring up a lot of questions about who else deserves attribution for these specimens and who else collected them. Let's see. Here is another specimen from the University of Oklahoma. And this is important because this is a rare species, and this is apparently the first collection of that rare species made in the state. So this is by Amy Butode, who's one of the collectors on this sheet. Yeah, one of the collectors, and Bruce Hoagland, who also works with the Oklahoma Vascular Plants Database. And those of you that are, if you're not out looking for Brassicaceae right now and mustards, because those are some of our spring, you're getting ready for all our Apiaceae, all our carrot family species. And so this is one of them. Looks a lot like Tilium or some of the other ones that we have in this area, but is rare. It is rare in its distribution. So they sent us this specimen here. This is a specimen that was sent to us by Billy Turner, by the Billy Turner Plant Resources Center, sorry. Billy Turner has since passed away, unfortunately. This was sent to me by George Yaskiewicz, who's the curator of that collection there in Austin. And I think it was digitized by Amber Horning, who's the assistant curator of the collection. But this is interesting. And I was mentioning earlier about how important these collections are and this distribution east to west. But this is an area gigantea. So this is giant cane. And you can see if you're looking at the USDA map that this is kind of its western extent of its distribution. So, all right, this is the last one in here. This is from the BRIT Herbarium. I thought you might find this interesting. On the left is pictured Charles Wright, famous for his participation as a botanist on the boundary survey, the Texas-Mexico boundary survey in the 1850s. And this is one of his specimens that we have here at BRIT, collected in El Paso County in Frontera, which the exact location of is not actually quite decided on. But with that specimen, I just want to say thank you, because now I've lost my clock, but I know I am right at time. Oh, good. I've actually left us 9 minutes. So thank you for listening. And I hope that I've at least let you know a little bit more about a project that has many participants, both in our state and out. and told you a little bit about where you can find those data, because this is intended to be useful to everyone. Yeah, and with that, I'll open it to any other questions you may have. And I'm afraid I don't know how you typically ask questions. If you want to unmute yourself, please do what you normally do, or you can ask it in the chat. All right, I see a question here from Anne, and she says, how does somebody get involved? What I would recommend you do is to have a look at, if you like, you can email me, but have a look around at what your local closest herbarium is. You've got Sam Houston, Will Godwin at Sam Houston State University. He's actually just now kind of gearing up and working with his collection. He's a wonderful person to work with, so that might be somebody you could be interested in working with. If not him, you can go to that website, and I'm going to type in the search string over here, index. So if you type that that text string into Google, it'll take you to that website I showed you, hosted by the New York Botanical Garden, and you can have a look and see which herbaria are close to you, and there should be contact information there. But certainly send me an email, trehman@brit.org or herbarium@brit.org. I get both of those. Oh, of course, yes, Mercer. You can go work with Anita at Mercer and Suzanne at Mercer. They have a wonderful collection, and they're also wonderful to work with. I think y'all know that plant people are really great, and we all enjoy working with each other. So certainly look into Mercer as well. And I see another question here. Is there a need for additional funding? That's a great question. And I would say that, the way we wrote the grant, there's no way to really, they wouldn't have funded the grant if we had asked for every last dollar that we needed on the grant. And that's why we are relying on so many, on volunteer effort to help us. Well, for two reasons there, actually, because we do need the help. We can't quite get it all done just with what is funded, but also because we are not experts by any means in all the plants we're talking about, but nor in the geographic regions. And especially when we get to talking about that third step of georeferencing, which is to basically take a textual locality and turn it into a coordinate with an associated error. When we get to that level, it becomes very difficult for us to really be those geographic experts, those boots on the ground. I had a wonderful experience with a woman named Lisa from the Texas Master Naturalist, and I was showcasing a specimen, and it had some locality data, but it wasn't very clear exactly where it was collected. And she said, I know exactly where that was collected. She lived nearby. So that kind of boots on the ground knowledge, geographic knowledge in Texas and Oklahoma is going to be very important to us. So I would say there's certainly always need for additional funding, and you might reach out to your local herbarium or send me an email, of course. All right. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? Well, thank you very much for spending the evening with me. I know it is late, it is a Thursday, so I appreciate that you've all had long days and have tuned into this.
Thank you so much, Tiana. It was really interesting.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. That was fascinating.
Well, sweet. I think so. Hopefully, at least I communicated that. And I hope I get to see all of you in person at some point, maybe at a future NIPSOT meeting.
Okay. Well, I guess, do we know what we're doing next month yet, Lan?
No, not yet.
Okay, then I guess we have nothing further to share. Have a good week. Have a good month.